Hi everybody, I'm Sam. I'm a technical designer here at Epic Games. And you may be asking, what is Project Titan? Maybe not, because you may have worked on it, like several people in the audience. But if you didn't know what it was, let me tell you. So Project Titan is simply put an effort to build an open world, mobile-friendly sample game in, as my slide says, the most difficult manner humanly possible. I say that because Project Titan was an art jam. We ran it through ArtStation with thousands of participants. The idea was for us to build a beautiful world and then have people fill it with beautiful things, package it up as a sample project, and share it with the world for free. So before I get into how we did that, it's probably worth discussing who we are and why we decided to do this. So we are the tech content team. There's me. I'm a tech designer. Judah, our producer. Aaron, our senior technical artist, who Titan was his baby, and we all tried to work against it to really make it succeed. And Sebastian, our long-suffering engineer. And what do? Well, we build content that educates and inspires. That is a photo of me educating and inspiring at GDC. What that really means is we produce stuff that we want you to leave knowing a bit more than you do, or did, and wanting to make something yourself. We want to inspire you as well as educate you. And it isn't just doing live talks like this, though obviously I like doing these. Our primary function is actually producing, well, technical content for Unreal and UEFN users, most notably sample games. So we made Stackobot and Cropout. If you haven't seen those, these are Unreal 5 sample games. They are complete. You can download them, take them apart. They're fully annotated, documented, videos, all kinds of stuff. And we also maintain and update the Unreal Engine templates, content examples, and example projects like SetiSample and Lyra. So we end up having a pretty varied technical skill set and learning a lot of Unreal Engine stuff, which kind of led us to our next trick. It brings me back to Titan. With all the prior projects, we put out a complete thing. It's got all the Epic Games polish, it's all fancy, art, music, all of that. What people don't get to see is how the sausage is made. See what it's like to be part of a development team where you're working out of a depot, you're distributed, there's hundreds of you, and you're all working, iterating ideas, blocking out concepts, and sometimes just completely breaking the project. Not that I have ever done that. That's just not a thing I do. Sorry, people whose projects I have broken. There just aren't many opportunities to do that unless you are working in AAA already. And so this seemed like a perfect way with this sample project to give people that experience and educate and inspire without having to have them get a job building an open world game for 6 years. So that's what we decided to do. Titan Art Jam was born. So the idea was Aaron and I build a world. As seen here, this is the world we built. Sebastian builds out the character, camera, and some light game framework. Judah makes it all happen despite being the world's busiest man and mostly looking on in despair as we do this. And then we set up a series of ArtStation challenges. Basically invite the world in to start populating the land, working to make something magical. Once done, we clean it up, we ship it, and give it away as a free sample game just like Stackobot or Cropout. And we also want to take the assets and put them on Fab for free, all of that. Just really get a chance to get all this content out into the world in a way that's useful to people. So as I said, educate and inspire on a massive scale. Now, we could also wanted to teach good practices because we've been working in Unreal for a long time. We've learned a bunch of stuff. Unreal, there's a million ways to do things. So we were trying to teach good practices and kind of get across what we could. And we even brought on some special guests to lend their expertise. I'll get into them in a bit. But we also wanted to identify areas of improvement because not just things where user knowledge was lacking, but also on our side, looking into development patterns that were maybe problematic or confusing, obtuse tooling, just things that people don't understand. And then we can bring that back to the Unreal team and go, hey, this is what we learned from that. So big ideas, big ambitions, but first, had to build it. Took 4 months with 2 people. So here's how we did that. We basically wanted a large landscape, unified canvas for all the challenges. Folks need to see how their work intersects. And teams need to collaborate in real time because that's how game development works. We couldn't just be like, oh, you're all in your own little tiny levels. We needed one giant landscape. And Unreal provides that with Landmass. It's iterative, it's non-destructive, it's a great landscape tool. Especially when you combine it with 1 file per actor and world partition, we can have that level of granularity. But there's a problem. As it stands, Landmass doesn't scale super well beyond a couple of kilometers, and our landscape was huge. So we built a custom solution that divides the world into 1 kilometer landmass chunks, And that allowed us to use as many layers as we needed versus the sort of layer limitations that you get with one giant contiguous landmass space. So Aaron built that entirely in Blueprint. You could do it too, and we'll give it away with the project when we ship. So here's that tool in action. This is actually how it works. As you can see, that's the grid of the world. Only the gray areas are the parts that are actively being edited, which keeps the tool really fast. And as you can see, this is actually Aaron, not me, but he's dragging around a stamp, which is how we built it. We created a bunch of stamps. You can drag them, scale them, raise them, lower them, do all kinds of fun stuff, and then combine them into geometry. Also notice the sort of heat map effect on the environment. That is telling us how many layers we have. Because even with this system that we built, you still need to keep an eye on how many layers. So what we ended up with was 600, which is a lot. It was 700, we cut it back because we realized we didn't need them. And so that is how we built out the world. This tool, again, will ship with the sample. And this is what we ended up with, which is the complete landscape. It has multiple biomes, it's 8 square kilometers. It is huge. At some point, someone, me, swapped the desert and Arctic biomes. Sorry, Aaron, I never trusted a designer, but I just felt the desert looked better where it was. But yeah, we built out this world in 4 months collaboratively, and that meant we were both working in the map at the same time so we could really test out all of that technology and make sure that it was suitable for cross-collaboration in a larger scale, even though it was 2 of us. So it only proved a little bit, but it was enough to go, oh yeah, this could work. Each of these biomes that we built, of the 9, has multiple layers for different terrain types, sand, rock, grass, and so on. But beyond that, it's completely untouched. It's just open territory because we want all these lovely people to come in and fill it with stuff. So we built a fully tunable real-time day-night cycle as a plugin that will ship with the sample. I sound like a broken record. I'm going to say this a bunch. We built it right into the editor tooling, which means that our challengers could dynamically modify the time of day, at least once we put that feature in, and see how their work looks at very different times of day. Because one of those things with the day-night cycle is, oh, what if this looks really bad at night? Or what if this looks really bad in the morning? You want to make sure that you're okay with all representations of your art. Also, we built a really nifty grass shader into our landscape. So we also needed a character. So for this, we lent into Mover, which is the sort of Unreal Character Movement 2.0 system coming with 5.5. It's modular. It allows for clean, enhanced input integration, smooth mode transitions, and greater range of customization. It also supports rollback and is very networking friendly. So if you want to use our setup in a multiplayer game moving forward, you can. So this is a very early prototype of it. We had a full open world moveset, variable walk speeds, jump heights, grappling hook, glider. There's the glider right there. This is before we had art. And then, of course, the mode that we call walk sliding, because that was the temporary art we threw in, and then we're like, whatever, it's walk sliding from now on. It will always be walk sliding. What's fun with that one is that it actually integrates landscape and water physics. So you can ride terrain, you can ride water. As the people working at Titan learned, it was very unstable while we were building it. It's getting to a good point now. But it's a really fun way to get around, and it's the reason there are so many big, steep, curving hills is because Sam secretly wanted to make a snowboarding game with the rock riding. So that's all well and good, but the hardest problem to solve wasn't the landscape or the player, it was infrastructure. We have thousands of potential users. We can't have everyone come into Epic's Perforce because, yeah, they wouldn't let us do that. We needed a server, we needed cloud space, and we needed technical support. Thankfully, we have very good friends at Amazon and Perforce who are as passionate about Titan as we were. They donated staff, support, and cloud space so we could make this whole bad thing happen. I don't think it would have happened without Perforce or Amazon. We owe them huge thanks. I think Jace is here somewhere. Thank you, Jace. And really, it was a lifesaver because, as you'll see when the numbers come in, once we launched Titan, it got really big very quickly. I think I learned more about Perforce in that 10 weeks than I did in previous 2-3 decades as a game developer. But so, we finished the landscape, we finished all our infrastructure, we were ready to go, and then it was just us and our 429 close personal friends. We announced on ArtStation in March of this year with individual challenges for all the different things, level design, environment art, props, materials, characters, VFX, all of that kind of stuff. And these were all separate ArtStation challenges, so people could sign up for what they were interested in. Then we coordinated with Epic's marketing and community to really get eyes on the challenges because we really wanted to get as many people in as possible. So thank you to all the marketing and community folks who pitched in there. We really appreciate it. And we had high hopes, but the end result exceeded our highest expectations simply because, as I said, 429 challenges is a lot of people. Like, you could make several AAA games with that many people. And it was a little terrifying to think about. It meant that we really had to take community management seriously. And I'll get more into community a bit later on. But to start, we spun up a Discord. Shout out to Tina Wisdom from our community team for looking at the Discord that Aaron and I built, going, no, and rebuilding it so it was good. Tina rules. So we basically created it for announcements, rules, areas for creative direction and tech guidance, biome-specific channels, so all the basic people who wanted to work in a particular biome could gather together, and then private channels for admin and Perforce support channels for like, oh, I'm busted, and a channel called Ask Epic that became wild anarchy very quickly. And through this, our community was starting to take shape right from the moment we opened the Discord, like organizing themselves into groups by discipline and biome. We nominated community leaders where we saw people who were showing leadership, and we encouraged everyone to play nice. And what's really nice is, for a large part, they did. So, Art Jam time. Let's go. Friday after GDC, we kicked off our first weekly live stream and started inviting folks into the Discord and Perforce server. We'd actually sort of started doing that Thursday to just take the load off of Perforce a little bit. But yeah, Friday was go time. It was the week after GDC, so we were definitely in really good shape. And we launched with a bunch of stuff to get people going. We provided a creative brief with concept art and tutorial guides. So this is the creative brief. It's designed to be relatively flexible. Pre-industrial, magical world, barely visible bodies of long-expired titans form part of the landscape, which definitely didn't cause any issues. Multiple biomes. Aesthetically, our goals were stylized, exaggerated, and painterly. We weren't going for hyperrealism. We're going for a charming, vaguely cartoony, painterly world. And that was the brief. And then we also provided a lot of guides, most of which I wrote. So we had material art guide, Unreal installation, Perforce setup, a lot of that stuff, just to get people going. Because our biggest fear is, we wanted to open this up to everyone. Most people who haven't worked in games haven't necessarily used Perforce. They haven't necessarily used Unreal or even installed it. So we wanted to get them in as quickly as possible. So we produced these guides. Nonetheless, they were the biggest support asks with each influx of new users. And huge thanks to the Perforce and Amazon folks stepping up and helping. Thanks to our community for stepping up and helping, especially thanks to Kuku, sitting over there, for being the king of Perforce answers. And beyond that, we provided base content, master materials to complete the documents, things like that, provide people a solid place to start. We'll get into the base content in a bit because, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but we started. We also had our wandering critics, so we brought in some professionals with professional chops to just provide advice and feedback to our challenges, both in Discord and on weekly live streams, as we did with Polygon, our character artist, who you can find on YouTube, really good person. And we do live crit, basically, which is really valuable, I think, for people. And then we made training content, a lot of training content. If you wondered why I couldn't speak at the end of the 10 weeks, this was probably it. We provided hours of video, mostly made on the fly in response to user needs, whether it was technical art guides from Aaron, things like how to use materials, terrain modeling, or more design stuff from me, like how forests work, which proved necessary because we were like, let's get into PCG. And then we're like, oh, maybe we should talk about how to use PCG and ways to make it effective visually. People have commented that there's more than entire paid training courses worth of content in Titan, and they're probably right, and we want to get that into the world as much as we can. So in Titan ships, we're going to try and get that out to you as well. So there were rules. And the idea was basically to keep the project secure, but also stable for most participants, which, you know, is never going to be perfect. But we wanted to not let anyone sit on assets for 24 hours. We didn't want people modifying certain aspects of the project, adding plugins. We didn't want you to do giant check-ins, a bunch of stuff like that. And we asked people to play nice, and as I said, they mostly did, which was wonderful. We had to ban one person out of 4129 over the entire project. Everyone else was really good, and when there were fights, Aaron and I could step in and just generally it would be resolved very, very maturely. People were really nice. And one thing that we didn't do is choose to use asset validators, because we thought source control was daunting enough that we didn't want to add an additional burden. Figured it might we might come to regret that. We absolutely did, but I still stand by the decision because we got a continual flow of stuff into our servers, which was the key thing. People don't check in. There's no Titan, it's just a landscape. So let me throw you some numbers. Over the 10 weeks, 4129 challenges. This is how many people joined our Discord, which meant for the 4 of us, it was a lot of community management. Discord was great though, I miss it. I should go hang out. We had 1490 workspaces in Perforce. So you can see as people signed up, the more complicated or intimidating got, we definitely dropped some people because people were like, oh, this might be too much for me, or I'm scared of Perforce or whatever. But we were trying to get as many people in. And so basically we ended up with about 600 active users who were regular contributors, regularly checking stuff in, who helped build out this whole world. And beyond that, we had people doing concept art, we had people doing character concept, people doing lore work, all kinds of stuff. And so even though there were only 600 people checking into Perforce, there was a whole lot of community there. So here is our change list count. It's 18,000 changed lists by week 10. So that was a lot of check-ins, that was a lot of work. It meant keeping the build stable was relatively complicated. We did our best, wasn't always successful. But there was a lot of stuff checked in. 230,000 files. And not all of them needed to be checked in, but a good fair few did. And it was, we got that free flow of content that we wanted. So to talk a little bit about the cloud, since we're talking about check-ins, Titan lived in the cloud. It's 1 Perforce server, 3 proxies, so we had fast access in Europe and in Asia. And we had Horde set up to do automated HLOD builds, $8 a day. They did not always work, I'll get into that, but it was not HLOD's fault, it was ours. We had Grafana set up, so we could visualize our Perforce server usage, so we could predict spikes, we could do a good job of managing server load. Kudos to Sebastian and the Perforce team for keeping that thing up. It was really impressive. We used Cloud EDC. Once we enabled that to just optimize efficiency, it became the largest cost by a significant margin. But our spend was 22 grand for a 10-week art jam with, 1,400 people in our Perforce server. So really, relatively affordable. And once again, thank you to Perforce, thank you to Amazon. So, people made so much stuff. That's what it really boils down to. We got all these check-ins, we had all this infrastructure so people could do this. So these are in-editor captures from mid-development, which is why they tend to be a little bit framey. But I just wanted to show off some of the just wonderful work that people did here. We had those 19,000 submissions, 200,000 files. It was 80 gigs of assets. About 12,000 meshes, 8,000 textures, 200 skeletal meshes, 5,400 materials, nearly 200 Niagara particle systems. And that's in a 64 square kilometer 8x8 play space split into 9 biomes with regional characters all made from scratch in 10 weeks. And it went from that empty landscape I showed you earlier to this, which is just stunning work. It really was, I don't want to gush, but I'm going to gush anyway. It was inspirational. I was educated and inspired, and I think that was really wonderful. So we also had characters. Characters was a bit more of a challenge simply because character modeling is not just making a character. It's skinning them, it's rigging them, it is getting them into Unreal and having them work with our character and animation system. And they can be really challenging. The people who stuck with it did some amazing work, though. These are some really cool characters. I love the bird people, they're my personal favorite. Shout out to the bird people. It's also worth noting that this character system is mix and match, meaning you can swap out your head, your legs, your hair, and be kind of a weird hybrid of all these characters if you so desire. And that, again, will ship with the sample, so you can use that character system for yourself. We had a default character built by Polygon, and then, which was initially, well, this naked pink thing, is now a fully fledged character. But it really goes to show, in 10 weeks, we went from this to this. This is gorgeous forest work. And I'm just going to go through a couple shots of the sort of what came out of the last 10 weeks. So, marshlands. You've probably seen this in some of the screenshots. It's got really gorgeous atmospherics. It's got a really distinct sense of character. It was one of the first places to really successfully lean into PCG. Sulfur. Our sulfur region was one that we were worried about, simply because we built this flat plane with green bits, and then we're like, oh no, what's someone going to do with that? And what they built was this amazing, almost alien landscape. It's really fantastic. So we have grasslands. just beautiful, relaxing, calm. You can see one of the forts in the distance. Back to sulfur, just because I like the sulfur base. And then we had desert. And if your biome didn't get shouted out yet, it will be, don't worry. Desert had some amazing cactus work. I love deserts. I'm a person who lives in Los Angeles and goes to the desert all the time, and it made me so happy. The desert was kind of my baby. So it was really nice to see people do great work in it. And then we had, say, giant trees with houses in them. I will show you a different shot of that. But yeah, this is a tree hundreds of feet up in the air that you can use a grappling hook to get from house to house to house and explore. So a little bit more grasslands leading into the Arctic in the distance. And then this is that treehouse from a distance, just so you can see sort of the density of geometry in areas like our tropical regions. Because people really went really far from taking empty nothing space to really like complete game environments. That said, there were areas of improvement. This is live crit with Aaron and Sam, which didn't always go down well. We tried to do our best to be nice. So the end results were really encouraging, but there are areas where we can see people falling into naive or inefficient development behavior. Some of this was inexperience, some of this was stuff we could take back to the engine and tooling teams and use as user feedback. Now we ran regular live crit sessions, either in Discord or during our weekly live stream, to provide feedback and videos to provide more generalized advice. So let's talk about some of the areas where we did run into issues. Nanite, because nothing comes for free. You know, the hype of Nanite is infinite polygons for free. In reality, there's always restrictions with the tool set. It's just you've got to work with it. It's modern, so it's got different issues. So, you know, one of the big ones was people are generally being trained to model geometry at low poly, so it's more efficient. Nanite doesn't really care about that. We ended up with these spaces that had these sort of like stepped edges versus curved edges. And we really encourage people to like add the curves, add the extra geo, it's not gonna hurt you. And we can always LOD it down for lower spec platforms. So it's not unlimited polys for free, but building deliberately low poly structures doesn't really help. It gets the same performance either way. So why limit your work? And then we had kind of the opposite problem. And I apologize in advance to the person whose window I'm using. This is actually from a really cool area. There is no value judgment on any of the work I'm showing. It's just the stuff we captured while we were doing the work. So as you can see here, this is the Nanite topography of it. Those bricked with tiny little dots, there's a really, really, really high try. And then you see these super stretched triangles at the edge. So obviously the topography of this topology of this space is not quite how you'd want it for a final model. And this is what it looks like when it's not in Nanite view. It's this really pretty window, but it doesn't need to be built like that. It needed to be cleaned up. So a lot of that, we produced feedback and content to help people optimize and improve their work because it looked gorgeous. It just needed a little bit of cleanup on the back end. Then performance. Performance is always going to be an issue. Games don't magically run well, especially complex open world environments. And we definitely ran into performance issues if you were working on the project. Yeah, sometimes it was really hard to get it to run. Sometimes it just ran very slowly, and sometimes editing the world was very slow. So one of the bigger things we had to do is get people to think about performance with their work. Because as with Nanite, a lot of the old rules don't apply, but you can still do a lot to hinder yourself in the project. Here's a big one. Dropping skeletal meshes into the world. Many, many skeletal meshes in the world. Despite us kind of asking people not to, people seem determined to pack the world with NPCs, which I get, because it's a beautiful world with these great characters. But they were mostly just skeletal meshes, sometimes shoved into a blueprint, sometimes just dropped directly into world, which has clear performance implications because it's a naive pathway. There's no crowd rendering, there's no optimization, there's no group logic, there's no animation budgets, and there's no cull distance. So we found all these areas where we were doing GPU profiling and the NPC skin count would just go up like that. And we're like, oh. So we built an NPC marker system to help people with that, but it came in very late and didn't get widespread use. We're working on that on our end, don't worry about it. But it was a big challenge. Then there was material slots. It's a lot of material slots. This is a good character too. I don't want to critique the character, but we tried to encourage people to max out at 3. This is a lot more than 3. So it could get very inefficient, certainly from a rendering perspective. So we're doing work to fix that now. VFX, that was not assigned a VFX type, was a surprisingly big problem. This was an education issue on our part to not tell people to do that as much as we should, but it meant there was no draw distance or culling on the VFX. So what you get is things like this giant hotspot, And then when you zoom into the giant hotspot, it's just a thing flying around a lantern. It's just that it never culls. So when you zoom all the way out, it's generating a giant Niagara hotspot in your world. So this is one of the things, mostly people good about this, but we did run into some issues. And then the last one, and this is an issue I don't put on people, virtual shadow mapping. You need to set a WPO disable distance, and Unreal doesn't have a default one, which means that world position offset, meaning, you know, tree leaves going like this or anything like that, just goes as long as the thing's rendering. When in reality, you're not going to see it beyond a certain distance. That's not great, but the real issue is that it invalidates the shadow cache, which when you're using Lumen, you're doing real-time shadow casting. You can see all these blue bits are where the shadow cache is being invalidated. And this is a view of our entire world, and that really affects performance. So we went in and just started, you know, fixing that, but it was a big performance issue. So we had some uneven results with materials. We provided a base material with what we thought was all key required functionality we could anticipate. In some cases, we added more. However, not all materials were created using the base material, and some of them had some issues. So this, which is from the marshlands, and it's actually a really nice model, looks fine in 3D, like be a tiling material made with a trim sheet. This is the material. Again, this is not to say mean things about the person who made it. It's that they basically, it maps out each stone with its own part of the material. And it feels like what happened is we gave people substance paper, they unwrapped their mesh, upresed the result, and imported it, as opposed to creating trim and tile sheets, which tend to be the more common practice. And that was an educational thing on our part that Aaron had to address, but it did mean that we ended up with some complicated materials. Here's another one. This looks like it would be tiling brick with some variants. It's not. Every brick is its own part of the material and a huge texture. And honestly, that doesn't look as good because you're going to run out of material texture space. It's going to get lower res, whereas if you tile it, doesn't. So but this is mostly inexperience. This is not, oh, you're a bad developer. This is just learning experiences and us making sure that you knew that. Characters are tough. I mean, one of the main things we tried to get across with characters is that building a skeletal mesh is hard. And we have animation rigging tools in Unreal, they're very cool, but it's work. Like character artists they do amazing work. And one of our big issues was, excuse me, many of our characters never made it out of the sculpting program until it was much too late to give feedback. A character needs to be skinned and rigged, running on a character system, and with our animation before we can give useful feedback. Unfortunately, some challenges treated importing it as a final step rather than part of the iterative cycle. And it's one of those areas that was tough to get people to check in, which is a shame because people did some really good character work that just was not compatible with our skeleton and rig. And so we don't want to cut it, so we're seeing what we can do. But yeah, it's unfortunate. We would have loved to give them more feedback too. And another problem with the checking in really late is that it leads to tons of duplicate naming. You can't have repeated names when you're chunking for mobile, and this is a mobile-friendly project. Suddenly you had all these characters with identically named textures, and so yeah, that became a big issue for us towards the end of the project as we were packaging for mobile. Okay, scale. This was one of the bigger challenges we faced on two levels. On one hand, people did not feel confident modifying or sculpting the landscape to fit their vision, creating geometry that blended with the landscape, which the material would do, and modifying the larger context of the world to fit the thing they wanted to build. Instead, they tended to move straight into props and set dressing, meaning putting down like the buildings and trees here, when really it would be better to sculpt the terrain first, and thank you, put down the buildings and trees once you got the terrain where it wants to be. Instead, this was kind of done in reverse, and so it has a slight awkwardness to it that we're currently working to address. It's not that this was bad work, it was just I would have done it in reverse order. Now, so the other part is we've got people to step back and take the larger space, but the opposite, which is people get so used to working from that kind of God's eye view, as I block my mic, that God's eye view that you didn't consider the scale of the work from a player's eye view, which is something that happens to every game developer ever. This is like I've done this a million times. In other words, did it work on your machine? Did you actually playtest it? And people didn't always test their work, especially when it came to things like collision. So Aaron and I would be live creating on the live stream and sometimes we'd be shot out into space when it turned out the cool thing we wanted to walk on has just a giant box of collision around it. So it is always good to test your work. This is just game development 101, but it was a problem we ran into. Which brings me back to the training video content to sort of wrap up areas of improvement. It proved to be our most successful tactic when it came to helping with these issues. I learned mine from Aaron's videos. I learned a lot of things from his videos. He at least put up with mine. He's like, Sam, you made a video about forests. I'm like, yes, I did. And it has to be said, the videos were way more reactive than productive. They were reactive, not proactive, rather. So, in other words, mistakes were made. And that's on us. Like, these videos mostly happened because either we didn't provide the necessary content to get people up to speed, or we misjudged people's base level of knowledge, which is entirely on us in both cases. So this is sort of how it came together. We launched a bit earlier than we should have, lacking the things we needed to get people off to the right foot. That was because we chose to launch right after GDC while all eyes were on Epic, so we could get as many people in as possible, which is the right decision. But it did mean we had a very limited amount of time to produce our documents, our base content, and so on. I would have loved to have example level structures with level instances, proper use of pack level actors, larger array of base materials, a character material, more variants of both, FX examples, base art content, base PCG setups from the start. That part really came back to bite us. If we had provided some good example PCG, I think the PCG process would not have involved us convening a tech artist council. Thank you, Ren and Alan, everybody, for when PCG ran plague across our entire landscape, the community rallied together. So we had documentation, but it really wasn't enough. We needed to better explain what we had and how to use it. And while we turned out video training, it meant that we were always playing catch up. It boils down to a mixture of underestimating our needs and limited and unfortunate timing. But in an alternate world, I would have launched a bit later with more content. But if only we had more time is the lament of every game developer ever. So if nothing else, this is an accurate representation of the game development experience. That said, we got really lucky with our community. Our community was huge. They were awesome. They pulled us through. Without them, it's just like with Amazon and Perforce. This would not have come together. So here's our Discord. And here is a crash help bit of our Discord, which is always the bit I was scared to go to. And so we put a lot of effort into building community through our Discord, our weekly live streams. Thanks to Dan and Tina and community for making this happen every week. Regular live crit sessions. And the community response was very passionate. We identified clear leaders across the biomes and skill sets and tried to empower them. And we also got extremely lucky finding some very kind, dedicated, and technically skilled community members who cared as much as we did. Shout out to Kuku again. Thank you for being our DevOps person when we had no DevOps person. We had a tech artist group, as I said, and just an overall wonderful group of folks. So if Aaron and I weren't available, because I'm in the US, he's in England, Sebastian is in Latin America, so we're not always available, people would step in and help out. And it really was nice to see everyone was in it together. No one seemed to be that ego-driven. It was all, let's make this thing. And we did our best to reward them with, swag. And we produced some really nice swag. And this leads to a little side story I'm going to tell. So we set up a secret Discord swag channel. This is a community management tip. So one, we wouldn't just say, oh, why didn't I get swag? We invite you to the channel, we say you get this number of stars. The stars add up to how much swag you get. And we did that for about 3 weeks in for people who are doing amazing work. We wanted to bring them in. But what that meant was all those people got, Aaron Langmead has invited you to a private Discord channel. And everyone was like, oh no, what did I do? Am I in trouble? And so when we wanted to reward everyone, we instead terrified them. Sorry. But we did get the swag out. Shout out to Judah, our producer, and his son's friend for making that happen. But we got our swag out, we got these nice hoodies, and we felt like it was the least we could do to thank people. And then there was the day before we closed the project, which I think anyone who was on Titan will remember, which is basically a sheer number of check-ins tanked and corrupted our Perforce server. But that's why you have source control, so you can roll back. And we had good community messaging. People in the community were out there helping, making sure everyone didn't panic, getting all the information we needed. They would work with the Perforce folks. And between that, the Perforce folks and Sebastian just being a rock, we were back up with almost no work lost in a couple hours, which I thought we were going to be down for good. We were going to have to delay the end of the project, all of that. But instead, between community and our team, they rallied. It was really inspiring. And then, because I will give you ominous tones, the project wraps. So we ended up with a final live stream. We shut down server access. We showed off the amazing work people had done, and we generally just gushed a lot. Like if you're used to live crit with Sam and Aaron, where they're like, "Those guys are mean," we were just like full of love and emotion. Like I was deeply emotional during that. I don't know if anyone noticed, but I really cared, and it was really amazing, and it was sad to see it end. And that was fantastic, but then things get very real. Because we needed to ship Titan as a sample project. And it needed to be ship shape, it needed to be clean, and there was a huge amount of work to do to get it there. It was about 100 gigs in size, all said and done. I have a zip file of the AWS cloud server, and it's huge. It was inevitably pretty messy, because people were checking stuff in, we weren't validating assets, and we're also just not, we want people to work. We don't want to be like, hey, you know you didn't do this exactly right, your work is cut. We mostly want people to get people's work in and show it off. So we took that on ourselves. We also didn't use asset validators because we like punishment, I guess. So one thing I'd like to reiterate before I go forward here is that anything discussed from here on out shouldn't be taken as a value judgment on the artist. They created amazing work. They contributed their time and effort. They did beautiful stuff. These are all just actual screenshots from the cleanup process. We just documented them in PowerPoint of all the stuff we did to kind of get Titan to where it needed to be. So here's a really common one, fixing up redirectors. If you're an Unreal dev, you have fixed up redirectors. And because Titan was such a huge and like wild project, we could identify problem folders when redirector fixing crashed the engine. So we went folder by folder, getting crashes, fixing up subfolder by subfolder until everything was done. And that let us know where problem assets were located. It also cleaned up all the redirectors, so it was just faster to work. And we had way less of those redirector issues. One tip, don't do it in one giant blob and then check it in. Fix some, check those in, then fix more, because if you crash the engine, you'll forget where you were. So just useful game development tip. Fixing up redirectors, do it in bits, check in regularly. So once that was done, we could use the size map tool. If you haven't used Unreal size map tool, it's awesome. And if you want to know why your project's so big, it will make your life much easier. So we saw a bunch of stuff. I'm just going to say, look at 1.2 gigabytes, bottom left corner. That is an idle animation for a character sitting. And the person who did it had a mocap suit. They were so cool. They did all this beautiful animation. And it's all raw animation data though, so it's super, super high detail, and it takes up a huge footprint. So we had to basically go in and delete or optimize that stuff. So my goal is anything like that, I would love to take it in, compress it, break it up into individual components, get it back in. Whether that's for the initial launch of Titan or later, I don't know. It depends on time, but just because we remove something now doesn't mean it's gone forever. It's more, we can't have 1.2 gigabyte raw animation files in the project. It just doesn't work. And some of it had to go, unfortunately, mostly because it was broken, more than, because not bad, just it didn't work. It was missing assets or something didn't get checked in. So we also had to delete a lot of unused assets, often found in auto-set folders. If you've worked in Unreal and you know the generated folder, our generated folder was like a mile long because everybody was working, generated geometry, modeling tools, all that kind of stuff. And that leaves behind a lot of unused bare meshes. So we just went through and cleaned all of that out. It's all gone because none of this is really useful to you. Do you need another sphere? We have spheres, you can use them. And at this point, we were ready to load up the main world, which we were very scared of, and start working our way through the map check warnings and errors we got, of which there were several thousand. Many of these were just references to assets that weren't correctly checked in into Perforce, were incorrectly deleted. So it's mostly a matter of just working your way through, cleaning up the debris. This did take several weeks, though. This was a really extensive bit of work. Because often what you'd find is fixing one thing would cause a cascade where a bunch of other stuff would break, and so you had to go back to find the root source and go from there. But yeah, this was a mile long for a while. And at this point, there are almost no map check errors, and if they show up, we fix them. But yeah, that was a lot of work. One of the case in points here is that we had a ton of null mesh references. And that was mostly, some of it wasn't checked in meshes, sucks because someone's art didn't make it in. But a lot of it were people made like blueprints that had their meshes in them. And if they wanted to create a variant, they just clear one of the blueprints to say, get rid of fringe on a carpet. And so it would be a null mesh, and we get a null mesh error. So we just went in and made sure all of that stuff was clean and not producing errors. Talked about this already, but people didn't use the NPC marker, and we had a lot of raw skeletal meshes. So I will talk more about what we're doing with them in a bit. But yeah, temporarily at least, they were deleted or replaced or put somewhere where they weren't affecting performance, because yeah, some areas just barely ran. So one of the things we noticed is adding skin assets, construction scripts, or repeat firing PCGs caused massive slowdown when making changes because our world was so big. Construction scripts generally weren't necessary in the era of PCG, so mostly we're converting those over to PCG things. And generally PCG doesn't need to repeat fire, so it's just a matter of cleanup. But when you change something in your world and you see 4,600 PCG things all building before you can change anything, it sucks. So we did a lot of work to just make it more usable. By the time Titan ships, this should not be an issue. Then we had external actor level crashes. This is problem assets that were outside the standard file size, usually corrupted things. It happens. 0 kilobyte files, just delete them. They're dead. They can cause problems. And then just look for things that are way out of whack. And this is mostly external actors in 1 file per actor, where something has gotten a bit hinky with on 1 file per actor, maybe 2 check-ins clashed or something. And it's better at that point to just remove them. And then one fun one that we didn't think about that came was people use grouping to organize things and didn't check in the groups, which was kind of a pain because we had to track down those because we got a lot of weird warnings and things not being where they should be. So we went and cleaned all of that up. And groups are just like a very old system, so sometimes they just got a bit weird with world partition and stuff as well. So grouping, useful, but best not to keep final product. We didn't know either. We end up with a lot of PCG duplicate world actors because people put PCGs inside level instances when the terrain is in the main world, and it would create a lot of duplicates and weird stuff. There are people here who can talk about that in great more detail than me. We used real-time material preview to go through and just look through all materials, find things that were broken. Mostly they were broken because people didn't remember to check in like a material function or a texture, and it makes me so sad. So generally I tried to go through and find decent replacements, knowing what the material is meant to look like, because I could go and look at all the stuff and see what their goal was. So if you checked in a broken material, Aaron or I have probably fixed it, and your work will still be in the game. Now, we also, as I said, we asked people not to build blueprints. I haven't really said that, but the problem that it caused, I have said. So we asked people to generally not build blueprints. You could use blueprints to, put all your meshes together so you have an organized prop as opposed to having each book on a shelf be an individual static mesh in the world. However, we didn't think that people would be doing full blueprinting. We didn't really want them to, just because it was an art jam. I've now reviewed all the blueprints, but there was a lot of construction script firing and PCG that's generally not necessary. So yeah, that was a big issue we ran into. So here's that example of a carpet with a fringe where the fringe has been removed and creating a null mesh error. Just so you can, it was just like one of those things where someone did something that makes perfect sense, but can cause problems. Okay, so this was the one that broke Sam. Just so you know, not that I'm bitter. But this is, again, more on us than on you. So a common practice was to use child actors to contain components in a blueprint rather than just the component itself, which meant that, say you had a bunch of static meshes, you open up the blueprint, it's all child actor components, where the child actor is the static mesh component, which makes editing or modifying them really frustrating. It's very challenging. Child actor components have a very specific use. So we wrote a tool to break those ones apart so I could manually rebuild them into blueprints with components. That was a long couple days, but it was necessary because otherwise we couldn't really clean up the work. And the reason this happened is because when you select a bunch of stuff and say turn it into a blueprint, the default is to use the components, the child actor component, instead of just turning them into components themselves. So people use the default because they're like, oh, that's what Unreal uses. Generally, we use the other one. That's our thing to deal with. But it's worth noting it did cause some issues. We had actors way outside the level instance space, which caused some serious actor bounds issues. This was really mostly common with PCG and relying on data outside the level, spawning a level instance and so on. And that would create some really weird stuff. PCG is still an early system, so there are still bugs and things. And I think we tripped most of them. People use packed level actors as a base class without using a source level. I don't even know how they did that, but they did. And again, it's all been cleaned up, no big deal. But I was like, wow, that's an interesting choice. So this is an example of a PCG sampling the landscape, but in a level instance, which can just cause all kinds of issues. I don't recommend doing that unless your landscape is also in the instance, which would be weird. And then people use the landscape material on regular assets, which again, makes sense from a Nanite point of view. Like, you're like, yeah, I want it to look down with the terrain or whatever. And we actually built that into the base material, but some people didn't sort of get that. We didn't explain it well enough. So we ended up with that. We're working on that right now. Aaron is doing a bunch of work on the base material, so we can clean all of that up, no big deal. And then there are a lot of broken actor references. So many broken actor references. This is all just people not checking stuff in mostly, or not deleting things properly. But when you have to package your project, you need to deal with all of that, or you can get into a really bad spot. And then one of the last more big ones we found is there are so many 4K textures, and ones with all this blank space in them that were 4K. And they're beautiful texture work. The illustration is gorgeous. There's all these paintings and just wonderful stuff in the world. But we generally had to reduce them by a power 2 or more. And they look exactly the same in game, funnily enough. Just to get the scale down, to get them running on things like Switch, where you have a lot less bandwidth to work with. But yeah, people did make really big textures that weren't always packed super well. And we did some video on that. It really helped. After that, it really upticked in terms of quality. And then this was the thing Sam's been doing. I went through all the PCG to make sure that everything we're spawning is static, if it should be static, has a cold distance, appropriate shadow settings, and so on. Because one thing we realized was almost every piece of geometry in the world was dynamic, not static. And so our performance was not very hot. So yeah, we did a bunch of work to fix that. And then here's a useful thing to know. If you're packaging and you have a bunch of errors, a repair errors button may appear. Click that button. It is your friend. And that leads me actually into repair tools. So this is one of my favorite things about Unreal, is the ability to add your own tooling to the game. I'm a tech designer. Half of what I do is build tools. So this is the editor utility blueprint we built to speed up asset fixing. In this case, skeletal meshes that didn't use the NPC marker. This breaks that, takes the data, feeds it into the NPC marker, and then replaces it with the NPC marker. So all your characters can remain without all the performance issues that we had. So we wrote a tool to do that. We wrote asset validators. This is when like dramatic music falls from the sky and I get hit with a beam of light. But yes, we built asset validators, or rather Sebastian did, to aid with the cleanup in C++. If you are doing an Unreal Engine game, the asset validator framework is super useful and you should absolutely be using it. It could detect meshes not set to static, ones with construction scripts, all the major problems I've highlighted, the asset validator will find and call out whenever you save the asset. We did not want to do that to the people making Titan because I think it would have just been demoralizing. But on our end, we need to know that stuff. So this is the asset validator in action. You save, the asset check log will just print out all of the things it's found. It's like, this has a construction script. This has a bunch of meshes that aren't set to static. This has no cold distance, all of that kind of stuff. It's really, really useful. And so with all of that, things started to come together, which was really exciting. We spent like a solid more than a month going through all of that to kind of get the project to where it was. If you thought we looked like zombies during Titan, we definitely look more like zombies after that. But with the light at the end of the tunnel, we could actually start packaging the project, hunting down and fixing the packaging errors. Because there is no light at the end of the tunnel. It's a train coming right at you. So packaging is way more stringent than working in editor, especially when you're dealing with a mobile build. Mobile developers think about your chunking, think about your asset naming. Arvind from the Evangelist team, who has a lot of experience with mobile, stepped in to really help us work through mobile packaging. And between him, Sebastian, Aaron, and I, we got the thing to package. You can package it, you can play it, it runs really nice, it's very cool. And since we could then package the project, we began performing incremental HLOD builds. Now, one of the big issues we had on the project is our HLOD builds almost never worked. You may remember that if you worked on Titan, the HLOD was often broken, and we were spending this money to build them, and then it would break, and we were like, okay, we need to find out what's going on with this. So it turned out there was a Niagara system with invalid bounds. That's it. The orientation vectors were set incorrectly, which caused an error, which meant the world partition could not load in the asset, which meant it could not build the HLOD. That shouldn't be like that. So it's a thing that we raised with Engine and so on. Also, it was the bird flock, just so you know. It's a really cool bird flock though, so we ain't mad at you. But it was a really gnarly problem to track down. But yeah, now we have full HLOD builds. And then we had to disconnect from the standalone DDC and reincorporate inside Epic, which meant moving the project over. And eventually what we're going to do is, before we ship, we're going to migrate the project to strip out anything else extraneous that is still in there, because we want the project size to be relatively small but have all the content. So we have disconnected from standalone DDC. We have all this stuff cleaned up. What's next? Well, there's unfinished work. Let's go fast. Okay, so to delete or not to delete. Now, the thing is, I don't want to delete stuff. Like, one of the clear things we said during the project was, if work is unfinished, it's going to get deleted. But really, there's kind of a wiggle room to that, which is, if it's clearly unfinished, yeah, we can't ship that. But we also don't want to ship a game with giant empty spots in the world where said content could have been used. So we had to work out what to do. So we prioritized. So this is my heat map that I made after reviewing each region by region. Determine what we could keep, what we would have to get rid of, what we could maybe move somewhere else, and then we divided the tasks up and got to work. Now, certain areas in red are generally in red because they were really dense. Like the Clifftop City region is going to be a lot of work. And so it's in red. There were some bits in the desert that were just really high detail. And then other areas, good job, Grasslands and Tropic team. You made my life much easier. Thank you so much. And so we went through the map, we broke it down, and then we got to work. So this is really a lot of what I've been doing. I am a designer. So I take unfinished areas through to completion through asset modification and reuse. I do prop placement, I do general layout work. And when possible, I try to create reusable areas using the existing asset. Nomad camps, forest huts, bandit camps, so that we can populate out in the world. So where there are empty areas, we can put a sign of life that is aesthetically correct, uses the assets from Titan, and is cool. So this example is a fishing village on our starter island. Top left is what it looked like. Aaron said that the buildings were just not, we couldn't ship them. So what I did was I went elsewhere, and we have a floating village out in the ocean, which I love. And they're fishing huts. So I took those, and I used them for the fishing village with a bunch of appropriate props. And one thing I forgot to do at first was fishing village huts all float. They're on the water, they go like this. So I created, I'm like, look at my awesome fishing village. And I'm like, all the huts on land are all going like this the whole time. And so I had to go and fix that. But yeah, so this isn't about replacing people's work whenever possible. We want to use the work in the project. But if something is just not to a point where Aaron believes it's shippable, he's the tech artist and it's his project, then we have to find a replacement. We try not to do that, but I wanted to highlight that we do that sometimes, just because I don't want people to be disappointed if their work wasn't in the game. There's also using PCG to fill out empty and unfinished areas. We tried to lean into existing good quality PCG graphs for consistency. These are almost all made by the folks who made Titan, not me. I cleaned them up a little bit, but as you can see, you go from this barren plain to, yeah, look at that forest, and I put some huts and stuff in that forest. It feels like a game space. And then again, to repaint the terrain, to better integrate the materials, create variety, prevent obvious tiling. We're currently in the middle of a big material rework, which is why people in the volcanic region, don't worry, we didn't break all of your terrain modeling assets. They're just jet black right now while Aaron redoes the material. But we are basically working on making the terrain less tiled, have more variety, and really integrate model geometry into it. And this is just a screenshot I took that was nice of work that I did. So this was a barren area in the Arctic region. It just had the sort of glowy plinth thing in the middle. I put in a forest, I put in on the cliff work, and this is all props other people built. I was just using it to build out the space. And that was the idea, is we don't want any of the space to feel unfinished. So all those areas in the background in Arctic, they're all going to get that same treatment because I want to show off your work and make it feel like it fits in a world. And we had unfinished business of our own to attend to, and as I'm running quickly, I'm going to go real fast. Okay, mobile packaging, as I brought up, zillion name issues we had to deal with. We were omitting engine content from our cook because we're geniuses. You need engine content if you're cooking for mobile. And then our camera control and menus were unfinished. So this is Sebastian actually recording and then debugging our updated camera system. We rewrote the whole character, move of 5.5, new camera system. Everything is a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is skip forward. So he does all of that stuff, and then he's recorded it for a visual logger. So when I play, come on, play the video. There we go. If I skip, it doesn't want to do it. But yeah, so basically we built a visual logger in there that lets you, why do you hate me, PowerPoint? But it basically what it does is it lets you log, it's like you can see it recording there. He's recording the camera as the player moves around, and then afterwards he can go play back that log and it will show all the camera movement, it will show where it intersects with things, where the transform get messed up, and so on, and we can go debug the camera from that. So we're building a much tighter camera. We're also redoing all the overall movement logic because movers come a long way. You will no longer get launched out of lakes by the walk, I promise. Okay, I don't promise, but I hope. And that's kind of sort of where we ended up, is we're just finishing up the project now. So what is next for Titan? Well, we are not done yet, though hopefully we will be soon. And it has really come a long way. So what I wanted to end is, as I talk, I want to show currently where the project is. This is the latest work. This is a combination of the work by the team and the work by us internally to sort of finish it out. It's stunning. It is so much good work in all the regions. Look at that. I want to play that game. I want to run around that space. I want to grappling hook up onto things. And for instance, this area, I didn't think this was going to be done, the jungle temple. And it was, and it's amazing. This is my favorite PCG graph. But yeah, people did a lot of really cool work. It's got tons of atmosphere. It's got a huge variety. It's a massive, massive world. This is, I think, entering the frog temple, if I'm not incorrect. And it's just like a giant, beautiful thing. We're finishing. It's almost done, and then it will come soon. So the idea is we will put it out, we will give it to you, we will put all the assets on Fab, and then in an ideal world, we will update it as best as we can moving forward. And at that point, that's my talk. I have 2 minutes left, so if someone wants to ask a question I can answer in 2 minutes, I'm happy to do it.